Good evening, everyone. So tonight we're going to have an actual discussion. If I can actually allow Rhonda to speak. I intend to, of course. So I am your teacher and fellow student, Heidi. Rhonda is my partner. And tonight I'll share just a teeny little bit about our background. I was a teacher in elementary school for 26 years, and she spent about the same amount of time doing IT. Most recently, she was with the school district and I was retired. Now we're both retired. So this is the What Can I Do podcast education series. And this came from our frustrations, as you heard in the intro, our frustrations with the way things are going right now and decision to try to do something about it and having absolutely no idea what to do. So education being, my refuge and the first bulwark against craziness.
Right.
We need an education. So we had some plans, of course, and as all good plans do, ours are changing, mostly because of our AI. We were discussing our first chart in our first class with Claude, and Claude had some really interesting things to say in response to some questions I asked. So why AI? Well, we had brainstormed all these different government systems and did a lot of research and had put together a chart, which you'll find in the description when we figure out how to get that particular chart in there. And yesterday, I was developing my lesson plans for tonight, and I asked Claude if there were any things that I missed. And Claude came up with a whole bunch of weird things that I'd never heard of. So, well, that was interesting. So I explored it a little further, and that led to more questions, and we ended up with the most interesting document at a much deeper level, much more inclusive level, and like we were doing comparisons. We can do compare and contrast. Claude was able to take so much more data to do the compare and contrast that we had more depth. And then Claude even noticed something about what I was asking that implied something, and we got to even another interesting level. So we decided to try and do this class tonight on that deeper level and see what happens, because now we're moving up into another level of education, shall we say. I hesitate to say what level because we're doing it so briefly. If we were to do a whole semester on this, it might well be at that master's level, but doing the 10 to 15 to 20 minutes that we're probably going to do tonight, I don't know. However, this document was so interesting and so long that we're probably only going to do about a fifth of it this evening. We'll see. So, this is the Analysis of Political and Economic Systems chart. And again, you'll find the link to this document in the description. So I'm going to move it up here. There we go. So I'm a lot more looking where I should be looking. So the first thing that we asked Claude was for major patterns. And this is what we got. Major patterns. Number 1, the theory versus practice gap. Well, that's something that we've talked about before. The idea of Marxism and the practice of Marxism are not the same thing. The idea of communism and the practice of communism, the idea of anarchism, the idea of democracy, the idea of a meritocracy, all of those in theory are one thing. But in practice, they're completely something else. Can you think of anything else that works that same way? Marxism, communism, anarchism, democracy, meritocracy. What works better in theory? Capitalism does.
Capitalism. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You're going to need to be louder, probably. So, let's talk about that just a little bit. So, Marxism. Marx if I understand Marxism correctly, Marx had this idea that things were going to happen very naturally as a result of capitalism. Did he say why? What's wrong with capitalism?
I think his analysis was that the way people would practice capitalism would exploit the workers.
So he understood the difference between the theory and the practice, it sounds like. And the exploitation of the workers would lead to revolt, which would lead to getting rid of the rich people a la French Revolution, but somehow different results from that he thought was natural that didn't happen in France, I suppose.
Yes.
Wait. He wrote before the French Revolution, though, right?
No.
When was Marx? Wasn't he in
It was like the late 1890s, I think.
When was the French Revolution was in the 17... Nah, never mind.
Yeah.
We'll pretend I didn't do that. That's right. French Revolution was right after ours.
Yes.
Which is why she dressed that way. Okay. So Marxism, I mean, I can't think of anywhere where there's ever been like a Marxist government other than the fact that they took Marx ostensibly and Lenin developed a theory, Trotsky had a theory, Stalin did what he wanted to do, Mao Zedong did what he wanted to do, and none of it resembled Marx.
No.
They kind of jumped over some steps.
Yeah, and it seems like the workers who were supposed to be rising and kind of leading all this seemed to eventually didn't seem to get to lead.
So the same people who were exploited for capitalism or exploited in feudalism or exploited in whatever system, quote, democracies, whoever was already exploited continued to be exploited in these communist systems, basically. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying. And I think different people rose to be the bureaucrats and who controlled that system. May not have been the same rich people, but somebody still rose and kind of took it, right?
Well, that's kind of what he gets to later when he talks about the opposites. We'll get to that too.
Right.
So, Marxism was never realized as envisioned. Communism, as you were saying, becomes a party dictatorship. And that's the thing. It didn't become the worker paradise. No. It became the party dictatorship because they allowed this one party to dictate what was going on. Real simple. And it wasn't for the workers. And then you have anarchism. Anarchism being like what I thought of before, right? The arch in the middle, like the overarching government system. Anarchism, it doesn't exist. So there is no overarching system. And that seems to only exist in reality in temporary revolutionary moments. So when people think that anarchy seems like a good idea, maybe, but it doesn't seem to last. And I think I pointed this out before, that the stronger or people with weapons or people with means take over and do something anyway.
Right.
Impose themselves.
Exactly. If anarchy will devolve to something else or evolve.
But either way.
Right.
Now, democracies, when have we ever had an absolute representative democracy? A direct democracy, because how many people can you do that with? I would do that sometimes in my classroom for a moment. But even at that, it just devolved into arguing more than anything else, often unless somebody imposes a structure.
Right.
So you end up with it says it often degrades into oligarchies and plutocracies. We looked this one up because oligarchy is the leading by a small group, whereas the plutocracy is the leading by the wealthy. And so you have a democracy, but then it ends up being a representative democracy because of what I was saying before, and you can't just have everybody in charge all the time. So then you end up with representatives who they can just choose to turn themselves into an oligarchy to a certain extent. Just takes cooperation, apparently, we're learning.
Right.
Then there's a meritocracy, which ostensibly we have, right?
Right?
No. But we're supposed to have a meritocracy. That's how it's supposed to work. But it's what Claude says is it's claimed by authoritarians in like Singapore and China. So in other words, no matter what kind of government you think you have, you end up with a small group of people making decisions that may or may not be in everybody's best interest and often isn't for the workers. That sounds right to me. And Claude says for a teaching point, almost every theory system gets captured or corrupted in practice. So to think your system has no corruption is probably absurd.
Right?
So that was point one. Now, point two, Claude brought this up from what I was asking. I was asking about these different patterns, and we were discussing patterns, and Claude went, hey, wait a minute here. So there's this convergence phenomenon. For example, fascism, communism, and totalitarianism all converge on single-party state control despite opposite ideological origins. So explain how fascism and communism are like opposite.
Well, communism, the state owns all of the means of production. In fascism, the means of production still can be owned by, you can still have a capitalist system, but be in a fascist government.
Okay, so communism is specifically not capitalism, whereas fascism can do the same things as the evils that we've seen in communism, but through a capitalist setup.
Right.
Even though the state in both cases kind of controls things.
Right, right.
In the end. The way it's practiced, at least.
The way it's practiced.
Right? And totalitarianism just says we're going to rule whether you guys like it or not, and it's us or me, and that's how it is.
Right.
So they're all different origins, but they all end up doing the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Then there's illiberal democracy, guided democracy, and a hybrid regime, which are all routes from democracy to authoritarianism. So the direct democracy is a nice theory. Representative democracy is what most people have. And if those people, again, decide they're not going to make your elections count, or they're not going to really follow what their constituents elected them to do, you end up with an illiberal democracy, essentially. And then once those people start guiding what's going to happen and deciding not only to taint the election, but to just take it over and make decisions, you have more of a guided democracy, which then leads you into a hybrid regime, which is essentially part democracy looking and part authoritarianism. That sounds to me like at least what we think is happening in like Hungary, then the USSR type of thing. That kind of trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
But I bet most of us don't think that's happening here.
No, I would think not.
Yeah. I don't know where we even are on that right now.
Well, right.
So the next one is there's state capitalism, authoritarian capitalism, and an oligarchy, which are different paths to elite control, kind of analogously, right? State capitalism is capitalism with the thumb of the state on it.
Right.
Authoritarian capitalism is the whole hand, not just the thumb. And the oligarchy, they control everything.
That's right.
So you can see that erosion of our civil rights, of our need to know, of our desires being interesting to them.
Right. People really have very little effect on the oligarchy.
How much effect do they have now? What we have? I don't know.
I don't know.
They let us think we do, and I don't know what's real right now.
Right.
I don't know. I thought we had a little bit more control, but then we didn't really exercise that more control.
No.
I don't know. All right, so now we have the economic control spectrum, as Claude calls it. The chart reveals a spectrum, not a binary. Binary. I'm going to guess that the binary that Claude is referring to here is between communism, socialism versus capitalism.
I think you're right there.
So what he says is a pure market leads to a mixed economy, which leads to a command economy, which is saying that the same thing happens economically that we were just saying happens politically, right?
Right.
That you start with supply and demand, you start with Adam Smith, you start with, who was the one that talked about the invisible hand? Start with a T. I'm gonna have to look that guy up. Malthus?
Oh, yeah. Maybe Malthus, yeah.
I have to look these people up again. But most command economies have black markets, and most free markets have massive state intervention. See, I see. So it's not. It's. I think that what Claude's getting at is pure capitalism would be pure market, pure free market, right?
Right.
And pure communism would be this command economy where they're controlling everything in the market.
Right.
But most command economies, Russia, for example, have probably vigorous black markets to get around a lot of things.
That's
North
right.
Korea does.
Yes.
But also most free markets have massive state intervention, and that's us. So
Right.
somewhere we come into kind of meeting in the middle to a certain extent. So we also have a black market. That sounds like to the extent that you have regulations, you have corruption. To the extent that you have rules, you have people willing to break them.
Correct.
Not that that's new information, but when you think about it, that it's always that way, then you go, well, what is the right system? Is there a system? Does it matter? Then see, for me, I would say the system that where the fewest people suffer, the least, like that.
Right.
But not everybody has that value.
Well, no, not everybody does.
Well, we have one more. No, we have two more. This is number 4. The democracy degradation pathway. And again, from my questioning of Claude was like, hey, did you know that this is a pattern that just keeps kind of happening? Clear progression visible in the chart is that you start with the representative democracy, because remember, the direct democracy doesn't really happen. So we go right there. Moving to the illiberal democracy, to the guided democracy, to the hybrid regime, to the authoritarian, to the totalitarian. Now that's depressing. And then you realize, though, that the authoritarian, totalitarian, there tends to be some kind of a revolution where then it will go back to, if you're lucky, some kind of democracy. Is this just, I was saying to Rhonda, this reminds me of the rock cycle. You have sedimentary rock, and then it gets pushed underneath and gets all this pressure. Sorry, playing it out in my head. Metamorphic rocks that then eventually get stuck in some kind of, and fly out of a volcano and become igneous. That's what governments are doing. I don't like that. And that makes me wonder if we need to find a way to stop that. Can we stop that? Is there always going to be an idiot born who's going to try to do this and who can find a way? Do we always get lazy in a democracy? If we're given rights, do we get lazy and not protect them? So Claude says this is happening in real time in multiple countries, and that the USA entry hints at this trajectory. Yeah, I think we're past that a little bit. Teaching point from Claude. Claude isn't sure I can come up with my own teaching points, so Claude made sure that I had them. I'm very happy because they're amusing and good. Democracy is fragile and has predictable failure modes. You can create a utopia. You can live in your utopia, but your children will come along and change it for you, and you will probably not die in your utopia. No, number 5 is also interesting. There are kinds of governments that are gender age identity-based systems, but they're rare. Mostly, we only really see patriarchies, a few matriarchies, and a gerontocracy, perhaps, appearing as government systems. The rest are theoretical, right? A youth system is somewhat, although we see a couple that are sort of coming out right at the moment, don't we? Where is it, Sri Lanka? Is there somewhere where Gen Z, I don't know if I'm right. where Gen Z was starting to take over, maybe a couple of different places. But Claude points out this interesting thing. Patriarchy is embedded in almost all historical systems. Maybe it's not a patriarchal system per se, but the patriarchy's there. And then Claude also points out that most neutral systems actually encode patriarchal and gerontocratic. You say it. Gerontocratic. All right. Assumptions. So what systems seem neutral, all men are created equal, super neutral. In code, perhaps I pointed that out, patriarchal. In other words, it's all about the older men who own property, okay? Rich, old men who often are white and Christian. We know this. But they're saying even if you take out the white and Christian, then the rest of the places still have the old men, probably with money or other means.
Right?
Right. So this goes on. This goes on. And I'm going to stop for tonight because I think enough is enough. But as you can see, there's some interesting things to think and talk about. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about critical anomalies. Why the U.S. is different from almost everyone else. No, not in terms of exceptionalism, you'll see. We'll talk about indigenous governances that we don't give credence to but should. Some emerging digital systems that are potential. And then we're going to talk about something called sortition, market socialism, and theocracy. So that will be our next. Please come back. We'll have it out tomorrow, more than likely, if not then the next day. Thank you for being here. Have a good evening.